we can really look at the skills involved in motivational interviewing, it's really important to think of this ethos that we've already talked about and thought about with the role play example I gave with Andrew. And the guys who wrote this, Bill Miller and Steve Rolnick, talk a lot about the spirit of motivational interviewing. And my understanding is that we need to be working with the spirit and with the ethos of motivational interviewing way before we're putting the skills in place. So we will move on to look at the skills during this training, but first of all it's really important to consider the spirit. And if you're on page 4 in your booklets, you can see that underneath the spirit of motivational interviewing it says 4 words. So we have collaboration, compassion, acceptance and evocation. And I was just going to talk about these in a little bit more detail, and then there will be some time for you to reflect on the ethos and the spirit and how it reflects or how it relates to the work that you do. Collaboration, and obviously you know we're familiar with these words, but let's have a little think about them in terms of the spirit of motivation interviewing. Collaboration basically means we're working with people rather than doing to. We talked about this when we looked at the ethos. So one of the expressions I've heard somebody say is we're working as though there are 2 experts in the room. I have some expertise when I work with young people in a school. I know a fair amount about drugs, alcohol, self-harm, eating disorders. I have some expertise. And the other expert in the room is my client. So the pupils that come to see me, I would regard them as the expert of their lives. So I'm working in partnership with them. It's not that I'm a kind of expert or a superior or a teacher and they are a student or a pupil or an inferior. In fact, we're both on the same level. So we're working with each other rather than I'm doing something to them. You don't do motivation interviewing to someone. You're working with them. So I think that's the kind of the first point. And I know there's an analogy that's used in motivation interviewing around this idea of kind of dancing with a partner rather than wrestling. So when we think about collaborative, you're working with each other, but also in that spirit of kind of, I don't know what word to use. I guess you're seeking for it to be mutually respectful and I guess harmonious as it might be in a waltz. So we're looking to dance with rather than do to. So that's collaboration. Compassion. Compassion is a really interesting word, and when they first wrote motivation interviewing, it was talked about a little bit less. It was more alluded to, but now in the 3rd edition of the book, compassion is it really figures, and it's a key element of motivation interviewing. What does compassion mean? Well, I think sometimes we think about it as being sympathetic or being nice to someone. Actually, it's more active than that. If I am compassionate, then I actively want the best for somebody else. So I will prioritise my client's needs, and I am going to pursue their welfare. That's the way that it's phrased in the motivational interviewing text. So compassion is really believing in somebody else's welfare and actively promoting it. So when we're working with service users and clients, or as a manager working with staff, we're actively promoting the welfare of the person that we're working with. So we're doing something. We're not just sitting and feeling, we're actively promoting. Acceptance is divided in motivation interviewing into a number of different factors. So within acceptance, Miller and Rolnick have 4 aspects. They talk about absolute worth, autonomy, accurate empathy, and affirmation. We'll just look at these in a little bit more detail. So, absolute worth really kind of relates to Roger's idea of unconditional positive regard. So this is very much about seeing the worth of the individual that you're working with. We don't always agree with the behaviours. Sometimes we hear people doing acts that really go against our cultural norms, or that are actually dangerous or unacceptable. But that doesn't mean that we don't hold on to the worth of the individual, the self-worth. And we can take this further. There's a belief that people are working towards their best self. People can get kind of, they can lose their path in this. But the belief is, deep down, we're all working towards our best selves. Another part of acceptance is accurate empathy. We're going to look at empathy in a lot more detail on the second day of the training. But in essence, and I'm sure you know this already, accurate empathy is putting ourselves aside to really try and understand and explore the world of somebody else from their point of view. So it's not thinking, how would I feel if I was in this situation? It's really trying to tune into, how does this person feel in this situation? When we think about autonomy, there's a real belief in this approach. So back to the spirit of MI, there's a belief that we want to promote people's independence and autonomy. It can be that while we're working with people, there can be a feeling of attachment or dependence, and I think sometimes that can be quite a natural part of our process when we're working with people. But ultimately, we're working towards the independence and autonomy of the individuals that we work with. And the fourth aspect of acceptance is affirmation. Affirmation is a key skill in motivational interviewing, and we are looking for people's qualities, values, behaviours, ways of being that we can accept and affirm. And this is a skill that we'll be looking at on the second day of our training. Evocation is this idea of drawing out rather than doing to. So the belief is that people have within them an intrinsic motivation, and when we use this approach, our role is to draw out that motivation and help people to strengthen it. So before we move on to the skills of motivation interviewing, it's important that we're really familiar with this idea of the spirit and the ethos. So under the spirit, you've got collaboration, compassion, acceptance, and evocation. What I'd like you to do now, before you come back to the screen and back to some group discussion, is to just think about those ideas of the ethos and the spirit, and maybe think about how that fits with your current practice. And if you have any questions as you're reflecting on this, please make a note of them, because I'll make sure that there's a chance for a question and answer session during the training. So please keep a note of any questions that you might like to ask. Thanks very much.